Okay, so that's it. Okay. I'm going to grab some water. So we'll start in just a couple minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Lundberg webinar. I'm Annie Douglas, your Chief Mom Ambassador here at Mom's Me. And we're really excited about this webinar because you'll get a chance to really learn all about GMOs and get some tips and some information about the great products that Lundberg has to offer. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter for today, Jessica Lundberg. At the end of the presentation, you'll get a chance to get your questions answered. So be sure you're typing in your questions into the chat window. With that said, Jessica, please take it away.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good morning. So my name is Jessica Lundberg. I'm one of the third-generation family members here at Lundberg Family Farms. I thought I would start out by talking a little bit about our family and our farm and connect that for you to why having a non-GMO food supply is important to our business and to us personally. So our family farm started here in California in 1937, but our family actually immigrated to the United States from Sweden to Nebraska, and we're corn and cattle farmers in the Midwest up until the 30s. The family lived through the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and that really shaped their feelings on how they needed to take care of the land, and they also learned quite a few lessons on what it is to be a steward and to take care of resources. So when they came to California, they got to have a new start, and they were very humbled and very excited to be able to grow food and to be able to make their living farming the land. So when they came in 1937, it was my grandfather Albert and my grandmother Frances, and they brought with them their 4 young boys, Eldon, Wendell, Harlan, and Homer. The boys were between 10 years old and 2 years old, and they came to a town called Richvale. And Richvale is in Northern California. We're in the Sacramento Valley, about 90 miles north from Sacramento. If you're looking at a map of California and you know where San Francisco is, you'd be traveling up north through the valley, right up through the center of the state, about 3 hours away from San Francisco. But what made this area really unique for rice is that it has a very heavy clay soil, and so it's really not suited to many other crops outside of rice because the clay soil keeps water from percolating or from flowing through it. It holds water. And underneath the clay is what we call a hard pan, almost like a layer of concrete, but it's packed rocks. And that's just been from geological formations and from years of water patterns. So we have this heavy clay soil, and in the Sacramento Valley we also have a very flat valley, and we have hot, dry summers. And we have a great access to water, as we have a couple of our local lakes are very close by that are fed by melted snow, and that's Lake Oroville and Lake Shasta. So that makes this a perfect place for growing rice. And farmers started coming to this area to settle to be farmers for rice production in about 1912. So there had been people here kind of trying to figure it out before my family came in the 30s. So when they came, they started farming rice. As the boys got older, they farmed with their dad. They all went away to college and came back and wanted to be farmers. And they farmed alongside each other. And then in the 1960s, we had an opportunity as a family in that there was a couple of families that moved to our local area to a town called Chico. And it was kind of funny the way it happened because these families were from New York City. And at the time, in the mid to late 1960s, there was a threat of the United States being bombed with a nuclear bomb. So people who were living in the larger cities were afraid that if the United States was to be bombed, that it would be probably a pretty poor choice to be living in a major city because that could be a big target. So these two families were living in New York City and looked for the safest place in the nation to move, and they found Chico, California. So when they moved here, they brought with them their businesses, and they had a macrobiotics food business, which if you've been following natural foods, that was kind of the precursor to natural foods with very unprocessed whole grain products. And so they came, the families when they moved here heard about my dad and uncles, so they had a reputation for doing things differently with fallowing their fields or resting their fields and using cover crops, and just having a different attitude about farming. And so they came to them and said, would you grow rice without chemicals? And really before the 1950s, just everyone grew rice without chemicals because the chemical revolution came after World War II. But growing rice without chemicals was actually something that my dad and uncle said, yeah, this would actually fit our philosophy, and we'd really like to be able to do that. So they had to make a couple major decisions to be able to provide rice for these customers, and they built on-farm storage so they could store their own crop rather than storing it with the cooperative of other local farmers. And then they also, biggest investment was they built the smallest rice mill in California. Now what that let them do is, as farmers, now they could not only grow the crop and store the crop, but by having a rice mill, the mill processes the rice to take the outer hull or husk off of the outside of the grain so that a consumer can eat it. And that allowed them to sell a finished product ready to be cooked. And that was huge because now they weren't just farmers, they could sell a product directly to the person who was going to eat it. And that was very different at the time for a commodity crop like rice. So what started as just a very simple business model of selling to a couple local families 100-pound and 50-pound bags of rice, they built into a business. They bought a bread truck, painted the name on the side of it, Lundberg Brown Rice, and started driving up the coast of California, Washington, and Oregon, meeting people that had small stores, shaking people's hands, telling them what they did, and asking them if there were any other products that they would like that they could make for them. And so that's how our business began. It was just making relationships with people and telling them what we did and telling them about our farm. So off of this, we had whole grain brown rice products, but then we started making things out of rice because as far as we were concerned, there's so many things that you can do with rice, and there's so many different varieties of rice. And because we had a farm, it gave us this unlimited ability to be able to do a lot of these fun things. So we not only grew brown rice as a single variety, but now we grow 17 different varieties of rice. And if you've gone to the supermarket to see some of our products, you've seen not only products like short grain brown and medium grain and long grain, and those are on the size characteristics, but you've also seen some Italian arborio rice that we grow and some specialty colored brands like our Wahani and our black rice. Even things like the aromatic rices like our California Basmati and California Jasmine. So we have over 250 different products also made from rice, like rice cakes, rice pasta, rice syrup, rice chips, and some rice flour and some side dishes or rice entrees. So there's quite a few different things, and it's been really exciting for us to have that connection. But then what brings us to the conversation today with why having a GMO-free food supply is important is because as we were farming, we were very tuned into our responsibility for stewardship and just how you need to treat the soil as a living organism and not just as something to plant a seed into that you walk away and kind of spoon-feed medicine of chemicals to, but something that really needs to be a holistic process that you're involved with, making decisions on how to keep it healthy. And in the 1980s, we saw the development of new technologies. It was being called genetic engineering, or the product of it was being called genetically modified organisms. The definition you'll see on the slide, organisms in which the genetic material or the DNA has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally. Now, there were a lot of people, especially at the development of this technology, who said, well, we've been altering genes for thousands of years, and this is the same thing. And it's not the same thing. And we could see that as farmers, especially as being connected to our own seed supply and understanding what it takes to select and develop new varieties. This technology was new. So where we are now is traditional plant breeding and selection has been done for thousands of years, but this technology has really only been done in the last 30 years. So the history of GMOs, like I said, as farmers, we saw it being developed in the 1980s, and there was a lot of discussion. There's a lot of excitement around it with, wow, this is going to be amazing technology. This could feed the world. There's so many things that you could do with it to create value for consumers and to create value for farmers. But the thing that we were seeing, though, is even out of all of that discussion and excitement, really there was only a couple ways that the technology was being used, and it really rubbed us wrong because it didn't fit with our philosophy, because about 90% of the crops even currently being used that are being altered with this technology are being changed so that they withstand chemical applications, or they're being altered so that they actually contain like a chemical compound. It's actually, right now it's for insect resistance, and it's called BT. So what it was doing was we were seeing this being developed to tie farmers to more chemical use or more chemical dependence, and tie them into not being able to save their own seed or have any control over the genetic material that was so important to them having those resources to keep their farms viable. So in the 1980s, as we watched this develop, we saw the first patents were issued. Really interesting thing, because and this is probably one of the biggest things about genetically modified organisms, is that you'll hear conversations about that when it comes to testing and food safety, that the companies that own the technology say that these products are substantially equivalent, meaning we don't need to test them because they're basically the same thing. But they're able to get patents because in another branch of the government, they go in with a patent and say these are significantly different, and we should be able to own them as individual life forms that are distinctly different. So that was groundbreaking in the 1980s, and the FDA approval of the GMO also happened in the early 1980s, and that was big because that was a government stamp telling consumers that this was something that they approved for us to eat and to be put out into the food supply. In the 1990s, GMOs, the first genetically modified organisms that had been developed for food production in the United States, started coming out on grocery store shelves. What was interesting, though, about the same time is there are many consumers that didn't really know what are these things. They knew that this was a new technology, but they were just so fresh and new to the market that there wasn't a track record of human health, or are there any studies being done, or what's the impact to the environment. And some of the things that came out was again just more of this idea of, wow, isn't this exciting? This could really change a lot of agriculture. One of the first products that came out that got a lot of hype behind it was the Flavor Saver tomato, because they had altered it so that it wouldn't degrade on the store shelves, so it wouldn't kind of get soft and mushy. It would hold its firm texture. Very interesting, because actually the company that introduced that product, they were very proactive in actually telling the public that it was genetically modified, because they thought that was something that made them distinct and that people would want to buy. But what was funny about it was they were so open, and people did buy it to try it, but it was a really bad product. So you still have to have something that people want, and you still have to be able to communicate what's the value to the consumer. So a very interesting model. If you want to take a look at it, there's some good articles on the web about how they introduced that. But then the next piece was when the technology was introduced out into agriculture, there was a lot of discussion, because anytime that you introduce a product like this that requires you to spray a chemical over and over without having any kind of a change in your system, it just becomes an every year type thing, almost like a prescription, that you're not really thinking about the system, but you're just doing it methodically year after year. There will be resistance developed, and that means that there's going to be weeds that develop a resistance, or that develop mutations so that they can survive the spray. And there was estimations at the time from scientists who were watching the technology, and they said, you know, it'll be probably 3 to 5 years until you start seeing resistance. And that was almost exactly what you saw. Within about 3 years after crops were introduced, you started to see reports here and there about there's maybe an escaped pigweed type species that's gotten away from us. Then there's some, about 5 years later, it became much more rampant, where you heard farmers saying, wow, this is not working. I have big patches of weeds that are just not dying. And so they were actually applying more and more chemicals and getting very frustrated, saying, now what do I do with this? So then also in the 1990s, the European Union required the GMO labeling. And they were actually very progressive in looking at the health of some of the foods coming into their countries, and so they had been fairly proactive in doing that. It's interesting too, because that was in the 1990s when the first labeling in Europe was required, and now there's over 60 countries in the world that require labeling of genetically modified organisms, and it's a pretty wide range of countries actually, from not just the European Union, but Turkey, and Syria, different parts of Asia, Thailand, India. So it's been something that many countries have seen as something that they'd like to have their societies be able to make the choice and to be able to track these foods, so that if they're labeled, they can follow them through the food chain and see if they're having health issues. Because if they're not labeled, then you really don't have a way to track them. In the 2000s, so within the last 10 years or so, we have seen not just resistant weeds develop, but we've also seen genetically modified resistant pests discovered. And I mentioned earlier on that about 90% of this technology is being used either for an herbicide resistance or to put a gene in a plant so that the plant itself creates the chemical that can ward off an insect. Well, insects are very adaptive, just like weeds are. They want to survive, and so there have been insects that have developed resistance as well to this technology. So you're seeing something that if you think that it's a one-size-fits-all and it's going to be a forever solution to weeds or insects, it's not, because the natural world continues to change and to adapt to it. So those technologies have to continue to change. The most commonly inserted gene for insect resistance is the Bt toxin. And also in the 2000s, there have been studies where the Bt toxin, against what the scientists were saying from these companies that own the technology, the Bt toxin was actually found in humans. So they were finding that the material was transferring or was being produced within the food parts of the plants, and that as people were eating it, it wasn't being completely broken down in our stomachs or in our guts. So very interesting then. Genetically modified organisms have issues, and even back in the 80s, some of the same concerns that we as farmers and as food producers had, we're starting to see that they're coming out. In fact, one of the reasons why we had concerns in the 80s was not just the connection to the land and the farming, but because we were able to mill our own products and sell directly to consumers, we had a way to talk to people and to ask them, you know, what's important to you about your food? And many of our consumers were telling us they want to know where their food came from, they want to know that their food is safe, and they want to know how their food is grown. So for us, that was a real focus for our family, and that's been a focus for our business as we develop products. So this type of a technology and these conversations that we have around it are so important, because there needs to be transparency. There needs to be a conversation that we can have about the products, because the owners of the technology need to be able to tell us what is the benefit to me as a consumer, or what is the benefit to me as a farmer, because there are concerns. So on the slide that you'll see that says GMO Concerns, so since their development, there's been some significant concerns that health studies have been insufficient, and that they've been mostly funded by chemical companies. So earlier on, I mentioned about the FDA's role, and that they've approved these products for release out into the food system. But the approval of the products is based solely on studies done by the companies themselves. The FDA hasn't yet required additional studies done by third parties or by the government. They allow the companies that own the technology to do their own studies and to submit those studies as evidence that they're safe. So, and one of the things that makes it complicated as well, is that because the companies that own the technology, these large chemical companies, because they own patents, they can also keep third-party researchers from doing the research on safety. So it's pretty convoluted, some of the issues with safety, and just in the last few years you've started to see some studies become published by third parties as they've tracked genetically modified organisms in other countries, and as they've been able to do some health studies. So this is a concern. Another concern is increased dependence on pesticides could cause adverse environmental and ecological impacts. So we've already talked about resistance to chemicals, so super weeds forming, and then also resistance to chemicals of the insects. But those are cases of plant and insect species that have been able to adapt. There have been, they call them non-target species, or plants and insects that aren't the purpose for the for the insecticides or the chemicals, who are also killed in the process of spraying. So you've probably heard the plight of honeybees or of other beneficial insects, and even native plants that grow along the edges of fields. Well, those aren't necessarily what the farmers are going out there to kill with the chemicals, but they do die in the process, and that does have ecological effects. Cross-contamination with non-GMO crops could reduce biodiversity and negatively impact organic agriculture. We've seen personally in our business, that was one of the concerns that we had. And we, the California rice industry, we're very lucky in that there's no genetically modified rice that's being grown commercially in the United States. But there has been research in the past. And one of the issues that we as farmers did bring up to the industry, and several farmers did, many did, was that there is a chance of contamination. And if our customers don't want the product, then who's responsible if these products, if genetically modified organisms get mixed in with non-GMOs or even with organic products? And in 2006, our company saw in the southern United States, where about 75% of all the United States rice comes from, there was an event in research plots for an herbicide-resistant rice. It was a research strain called LL601 that was being developed to withstand a chemical. There was contamination. It was through pollen drift. So pollen from the experimental crop drifted into a conventional seed line. And it wasn't discovered until a couple years later, when a customer of one of these rice producers from the South, a customer in Europe, tested the product and found that it was contaminated with GMOs. Well, what ended up happening was the European Union stopped receiving samples of rice or any kind of rice shipments into Europe. And the United States rice market, mostly the southern rice market, lost about $1 billion in sales that year. And it also, that one event pointed out a basic issue of the concern is who's responsible for the technology. If there's an issue like this, whether it be a conventional farmer or an organic farmer, if there's contamination, who is responsible? Because the owners of the technology don't feel that they're responsible. And it affects the farmers, and it affects the environment, and it affects the consumers. Another issue, creating farmer dependence on chemical suppliers and proprietary seed corporations. We have seen that because, again, having 90% of the technology tying you into using a chemical and having it be for patented seeds that you can't save yourself and you have to buy from a seed corporation, that does limit your ability to choose what crops you grow and the methods that you're using. And the last concern that we list here is oversight of development is ineffective, and once released, GMOs may be uncontrollable. So the idea of, again, that responsibility and the idea that these are living organisms, and that even though we try very hard to keep our systems separate and clean, that if we're irresponsible with them, that once they get out, it's very difficult to pull this technology back in. So what can we do? So we as a company, and actually we as a company along with millions of others here in California, supported the Yes on 37 proposition this last year. The proposition didn't pass, but it was very close, and actually it started a great conversation with, I believe it was over 4 million people here in California voted that they wanted labeling of genetically modified organisms, and that is tremendous. Just the idea that we got a conversation going and that we're asking for transparency in our food system and that we want to have safe foods and have the ability to make the choice of what we're buying for our families. The Just Label It campaign is a nationwide campaign. It's putting petitions out to the FDA as well as to Congress people asking the federal government to step in and to make mandatory federal labeling of genetically modified organisms required. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, take a look. It's at justlabelit.org. They have a lot of great information about genetically modified organisms and how they're in our food supply, about some questions and some good health study information. But even more, it gives you an opportunity to get involved and to send that message to Congress and to the FDA. And then I-522 is a labeling initiative that's started in Washington State, and they've gotten great support already. It's going to be coming up on the ballot this next fall, and they're asking their citizens to require labeling of genetically modified organisms within Washington State. But Washington's not alone. There's about 20 individual states that are putting initiatives on the ballot for this next year asking for labeling. And this is something that is very, very simple. It's very straightforward, and it is a basic choice that we as consumers need to have. And like I mentioned, this isn't something novel. This isn't something new. There's over 60 countries in the world that already label genetically modified organisms, and they do it for a good reason. They do it to give their consumers choice, and they do it to be able to track the safety of their food systems, and they do it so that they can send the message to the owners of technology whether this technology is valuable or not, because we send a message through our purchases. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a lot of good information on GMOs. We have a lot of good questions coming in, but those who are attending, please go ahead and keep sending in your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So, Jessica, we have, well, the first question we have is about GMOs. I mean, why do you think that the U.S. is still behind on labeling for GMOs? I mean, it's kind of disturbing to think that other countries are kind of ahead of the game and we are still behind. What are your thoughts?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of it comes down to basic politics, that the technology is owned by roughly five large chemical companies, and I think all but one of them, I think all but Dow is, or excuse me, all but Bayer is located within the United States. I believe Bayer is coming out of Europe. But these companies have a tremendous amount of political power, and I think that does get in the way a lot of times of progress if we're trying to do labeling through regular government agencies. Because right now, the FDA already has the legal authority to label these products or to require labeling, but it's not being done. In fact, when you poll the American public and you ask them, would you like to see your food labeled for genetically modified organisms, a strong 60% and greater want to see labeling. And we've seen initiatives, actually not initiatives, we've seen measures come up in state congressional offices throughout the country, but those have always been put down by lobbying groups and by political power. So I think that's why you're seeing in this country that really the movement now is being taken by the citizens through the initiative process. And as you know, the initiative process is not necessarily the most efficient process, but it definitely can get things done when it can't get done in the legislature. So to the point of why are we so far behind, I think it's just because we have some very strong politics working in the United States that are trying to keep these products unlabeled.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Jessica, you gave us kind of some great resources on what moms can do about this issue. Do you really think that'll make a big difference?
Oh, for sure, I think it'll make a big difference. When we had the conversation this last year in California, there were a lot of people that said, why are you even bringing this up? Do people really care? but we saw people having great conversations, asking questions, going to their retailers, going to their farmers markets, asking people, so what is a GMO? So why should I be worried about this? You know, reading articles, talking to people. And we had millions of people show up and vote for the initiative. So I think people do care, and I think when people speak out and when people ask questions, that's a huge impact on the market. When a consumer asks a question to a food maker, I think that does carry weight. And I think especially moms feeding their kids, they're looking for healthy, safe food, and I think that the manufacturers of these foods really do respond as well, and the government responds as well, because we're all citizens and they know that our kids are our future and that we're looking out for not only our own families but for our society and for our environment. So yes, people need to speak out. We do have the ability and the right to do it, and it does make an impact.
Right, right. And how about with our kids? I mean, is there a resource, do you know the resource that would help us teach our kids about GMOs?
Oh, there's quite a few resources out there. I mean, the campaigns that I mentioned to you, take a look at the Just Label It campaign and the I-522 campaign, and you see that on our webinar. On the last page, there's some good resources where you can get involved. But you can take a look online. We've listed the Organic Center as a place, as a resource. They have a great list of studies. They're peer-reviewed. They're scientific studies, as well as collaborative efforts to pull together many different types of studies, and you can read those. The federal labeling petition, even their website has links that have some kid-friendly information that can show some great YouTube videos. In fact, if you get on YouTube, some of these links will take you to videos made by kids, for kids, talking about what are GMOs and what can they do and how can they make healthy food choices. So there's a lot of resources out there.
Right, right. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. So moving on to some questions about your farm and your products. Could you just share or let us know if all of Lundberg's products are certified organic?
We grow, like I said, we have 250 products and we grow 17 varieties of rice. And our family farm produces about 5,000 acres of rice. And then we contract with another 10,000 acres with another 40 families in the local area. Right now we're growing about 70%, so 70% of the rice that we grow is certified organic, and the remaining 30% is our own label called eco-farmed, and that's conventional rice. So in answer, 70% is certified organic and 30% is conventional or eco-farmed rice.
And actually that brings me to my next question. What does eco-farmed mean?
Well, eco-farmed is a term that we came up with as a family. As we were building our business, I mentioned to you when we started in the 60s that we started growing organic on a very small basis. Those two families that moved to the area, when they asked us, would you grow organic for us, we said that we'd love to, and so we started growing about 60 acres. And that's a pretty small amount, 60 acres out of, at the time, what was about 2,000 acres of family production. But we decided as a family that, that organic was the way that we wanted to grow, but there was a lot of education that we had to do to let consumers know what organic was and to see if people really wanted to buy organic, because there's more risk involved in growing organic, and it sometimes then can result in being a little more expensive for us to produce, especially at the very beginning when we were trying to figure out what are the best ways that we can do this and how can we address our fertility and our weed control, because those are very difficult to do. But actually we've come up with some really creative methods, and I think we do a really good job of it. So as we developed our organic market, which started out very small, we had determined ourselves as a family that we were going to grow and sell as much organic as consumers would buy, because that was the way that we wanted to go. That was the direction we wanted. And then as we grew our business, we also had not just our organic products that we were growing and trying to increase the number that we were doing, but we had our conventional products also because we were growing rice on the rest of our farm. The rice that we grow conventionally, the reason why we named it eco-farms, we wanted to be able to have a conversation and let people know that we were doing it differently than conventional growers were doing. That even though we used fertilizers and chemicals, that we were going in and looking at all the materials we were using, and we were using optimal levels of fertilizer and not the maximum levels. That when we used a pesticide, that we'd gone through the list of all of the materials available, and that we'd chosen the least harmful, and we only used it as necessary. And that when we produced our eco-farms, that we were still using straw incorporation, and we weren't burning our straw. We were still using fallowing methods or crop rotation with our cover crops. So that there was other things that we were doing. And even now, when we grow eco-farm, which is conventional, it's not organic products, that 30%, when we bring the eco-farm into our facility, once it's here, we treat it as organic. So there's no post-harvest chemicals that are applied to it. All of the rice brought in is treated as organic. So that was an important piece for us, and it was just a way, when we talk about sustainability as a farm, the sustainability, I'm sure many people have heard that term of a sustainability being a three-legged stool, that it has to be not just environmentally sustainable, but socially sustainable, and then also the economically sustainable. So at the time, as we were developing our organic market from the 60s until now, we were growing the organic piece of it as quickly as possible, but to keep the farm economically sustainable, we had to continue to grow rice on the rest of the farm. And that's how the two markets got developed on kind of different tracks.
Oh, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And do you work with any farms outside of California?
We do have a few farms that we work with. Our rices are mostly, though, like I said, grown in California, because we grew all of our rice here as a family until about 1978. And in 1978, we were selling everything that we were growing as a family. And we decided we had to make a decision. Either we had to buy more land to be able to produce more rice by ourselves, or we had this great opportunity that we could actually expand and let other growers learn about organics and let other growers be able to grow with these methods on their farms. So we actually brought in other local growers here in California. And now we have over 40 families that grow rice with us. And that's everything from the area is a pretty small area here in the Sacramento Valley, but about 90 miles south of us towards Sacramento, and then also to the west of us towards Williams and Willows. So here in California, it's our family, which is my dad and uncles and my cousins, and then it's also these 40 other families that work with us to produce about 15,000 acres. But we grow quite a few different varieties. We have 17 different varieties of rice, and there have been years that have been very challenging here, that either we have had very little rain and it's been drought conditions, or years where it's rained very late into the season. And so that's made our planting in the spring very late. And in those years, we have a couple families. One family is in Texas, and then we have a family in Arkansas that we've met, and we've known them for over 30 years. I think we met them in the mid-70s. But we've worked with them so that if we can't produce a couple of our varieties here, some of the more challenging varieties that they can produce in Arkansas or Texas, then we'll work with them to help us make up the shortfall for those couple of varieties. And they help us out every once in a while, but not on an every year basis. It's as needed, because really we do rely here on our growers in California, because we want them to be able to expand their farms, and we know them and we have relationships with them, and we can also work with them to help produce all of the 17 varieties.
Right. And that's really great. I mean, do you have a strict process of selecting, which farms to work with, or how does that work?
Well, yeah, we have a process. It's really kind of interesting. My cousin Bryce, he's our vice president of agriculture. So we have an agriculture department. It's actually pretty small. There's about 6 or 7 people that work in it, and then they also oversee our drying and storage department. But within our ag department is my cousin Eric, Bryce's brother, and then Lance Benson. And Eric and Lance are our grower services managers. So they work with those 40 growers, and as we go into planting, like right now, we're getting ready for planting this year. We'll start working our fields in April, and we'll plant in May. And then our crop year will go from May, June, July, August, and we start harvesting in September and all the way through November. But as we're getting ready for planting, we've actually already been talking with not only our own family farm, but talking with our growers since last harvest about how many fields do you think you'll have available? What is your rotation, and what fields are you going to be resting this year? What would you like to grow this year as far as varieties? Because each variety has a different characteristic and grows differently, and it's good if a farmer can match up a specific variety with a field, because he knows which fields have different soil types and water requirements that will match specific varieties. And so Lance and Eric have been talking with each of the growers. And even as we bring on new growers, Lance and Eric will bring a new grower in. We have grower meetings every quarter. So we have actually a grower meeting for our spring meeting coming up on Monday of next week. And we'll bring the growers in, and we'll talk to them about how our business is going. We'll tell them about any of our new products, about how the marketplace looks and what our consumers are looking for. We'll even share comments with them from our Facebook page or from letters that we've gotten, so that they understand what the consumer is looking for, so that they realize that the work that they're doing is really important, and it does tie directly to a consumer that's buying a product that they feel is healthy and safe, and that they know where it came from. So we talk on a weekly basis with all of our growers, and we have quarterly meetings, and we are working with them throughout the year to help plan where we need to go and to work with their needs, because they have their family farms, and they know if they want to expand their farms, or if they're cutting back on their farms, or maybe they're trying to get their kids involved in the farm. And we just treat them like a part of our family. We call them our family of growers, so that we're working with their needs, and they understand what our needs are, and we all work together to get the rice that we need for the product.
That's really awesome. And can you, I know we're kind of getting some questions about your family and how involved they are in your business. How many of your family members are directly involved in the business today?
Well, the business was started by 4 brothers, so Eldon, Wendell, Harlan, and Homer. And from those 4 brothers and their wives, there's 11 cousins. And the 11 cousins are married and have kids. And we have, so our 3rd generation, we call our 3rd generation the children of the founders. There's 11 of the 3rd generation, and then there's somewhere, I think, over 25 of the 4th generation so far, from the ages of 0 to 25. And so from our 3rd and 4th generation, because my dad, Wendell, and Homer, they're still involved, but they're basically retired. They get to do whatever they want to do right now, which is exactly what they should be doing. But they're still here and involved in the farm, and we see them around the operation. But on a day-to-day basis, we have 7 of the cousins that work here. There's 5 of the 3rd generation, and there's 2 of the 4th generation. And then every year, we do have internship programs, so that if the 4th generation kids want to come and get an experience in the different departments and work their way through the company and kind of get an idea of what's here, that they can do that for as short a period of time or as long a period of time as they want. And it gives them an idea of the business and the farm, and kind of an idea of the opportunities as they get ready to go to college, of what they might want to do, and maybe they'd want to come back and work at the business. So to go from 4 brothers and then now to have 7 of the 3rd and 4th generation working here, that's pretty exciting. And that's just the business on a day-to-day, because we also have a board of directors. The company is a family-owned company, and we have a 10-member board of directors, and 8 of them are still family members. And then we also have 2 other groups called our Family Assembly and our Family Council. And we put the Assembly and the Council together for a couple different reasons, because we want to make sure that even if the family is not involved in the business on a day-to-day, that they still understand how important the family is to the business, and that we want them to understand what we're doing at the business. So the council talks about how to keep the family involved, if there's people that want to do projects or they want to just know what's going on, but that gives them a way to do that. And then the assembly, the family assembly works to get family activities together and keep everybody connected. So we've got quite a few different groups, and I'd say basically that everyone in the family is involved in one way or another in all of those groups.
Wow, that's really, really great. Wonderful. Now, could you share a little bit more about the other products that Lundberg has? One person is saying how she absolutely loves the risotto you guys have. So could you kind of share what other products you have, and maybe even any new products that might be in the works?
Sure. Boy, we've got a lot of products. Well, we do, and it's really fun because I actually just changed my role from the nursery manager, who I used to manage all of our seed operations. So I got to see all 17 of our varieties, and some of the work that we're doing developing new varieties or bringing in new varieties, whether it's breeding varieties or making selections from seed that we've brought in from different parts of the world to see if they run here. So this year we're introducing 3 new varieties of rice. Those should be out in some very select stores within the next few months, and that will be a short grain black rice. It's different from our black japonica. We're calling it black pearl, and it has a very aromatic quality to it. It's really yummy rice too. It's kind of sweet and floral flavor. And then we'll have a medium grain red rice. That'll have, it has a texture to it that's different, like a barley, and it has a really nice kind of a yeasty baked bread flavor. And then we also have a new Italian type variety called Violone Nano, very high quality risotto rice. And then, so those are our whole grain rices. We have 17 different types, but then beyond that, boy, we have quite a few products. We have our rice cakes. We have about, I think we're around 23 different types of rice cakes now. We've come out with a couple new flavors. We have a sweet chili and a kettle corn. We have rice chips. We have 9 flavors of rice chips. 7 of them are made with organic, and 2 of them are certified organic. And those are great. Those are really good for munching, and they're whole grain. They're made with rice. So even though I'd say our rice chips are not health food, they're still a snack food, so you need to eat them in moderation. They are actually a good option for you because of the whole grains and the certified organic, and the idea that even though they're fried, that rice absorbs less oil than potatoes and some of the other snack products. So they do offer you a healthier alternative, but they're definitely still a snack food. Then we also have our risottos. Those are great. I'm glad that you mentioned those because those are really fun. They're pretty fast and easy. And if you're serving them not just to your family but to guests as they come over, it's kind of fun because it's impressive. People don't understand how simple it is, and it just seems like something elegant. We have our roasted brown rice couscous. People who are familiar with the traditional couscous, which is a wheat product, know that that you can eat it hot or cold, and it's mainly known for its texture. And we have a brown rice version of it that's gluten-free, and it's a very fine grind, like a very small kernel couscous that would be more like a Mediterranean style. Then we have our pasta, whole grain brown rice organic pastas. They're really, I like them. My favorite, I think, is the penne, but we have the spaghetti and the rotini also, and those are pretty fun. And then we have our heat and eat organic brown rice bowls. Those are kind of ready to eat. So if you forgot your lunch at work, but you've got this in your bag, you can pull it out and have ready to eat rice in about 90 seconds out of the microwave. We have brown rice syrup that people use as a sweetener substitute. It's really good. It tastes like rice, but it's actually very sweet, and it has a very thick texture, a little bit thicker than most honeys that you get. Brown rice flour, which we sell in 25-pound bags, so you might be able to see it in some of the bulk areas of the grocery store. And we also use it to make our other products. So there's quite a bit there. We do have some new products coming out. Be looking in the next 6 months for some new entrees, side dishes. Those will be made with rice. We have some that have beans in them, so rice and beans. We have some that are rice and some of the kind of superfoods like rice and quinoa. And then we have multi-grain chips that are also coming out in the next 6 months or so. So those will be fun.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that. We do have a question about the rice syrup that you had mentioned. You know, for those who are not familiar with rice syrup, can you just share a little bit more about that and how to use it?
Oh, that's a really good question, because you're right. A lot of people don't know much about rice syrup. Well, our rice syrup is made from whole grain rice, or by whole grain I mean from brown rice. So it's rice that has the bran still attached to it. The rice is basically ground up, water's added to it, a natural enzyme that starts breaking down the sugars in the rice, because the rice is a starch molecule that breaks down, and you can condense it and pull out any of the solids, and then you're left with this really pretty amber-colored syrup. You can use it in the place of honey. You can use it as a sweetener like sugar, but it's not a direct substitute. So you could use it in those places, but you'd need to find the right recipe, because it's not a one-for-one substitution. So if you're interested in trying the product, you might want to get on our website, and we have a recipe section, and we have an entire section for ideas for how to use the brown rice syrup. So, like for instance, if you were making brownies and you wanted to do a substitution instead of a high fructose corn syrup, you wanted to use the brown rice syrup, there are recipes for brownies and for cookies and for even some drinks and other baked goods that you can see on there. But you need to use a recipe to start with, so you can see how it acts differently than honey or sugar or the high fructose corn syrups, because it does require different ratios of some of your leavening agents and some of your other ingredients. But it is a really fun product, and I actually like it just as plain as a syrup to use on pancakes, or even to use as a sweetener in coffee or tea. So I think it's a very versatile product a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I mean, we'll definitely have to check that out and learn more about it. Just a couple more questions, Jessica, and we're going to wrap things up. There has been a lot in the news lately about arsenic concerns in rice. Could you just speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So the arsenic issue, as it relates directly to rice, started a couple years ago. There was a couple studies that came out looking at arsenic in food. I think people probably heard more information or more press about it through the arsenic in apple juice. I think that was about 18 months ago or so, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. But arsenic is a naturally occurring element that actually is in the soil, the air, and the water. And we usually hear about it more as consumers in water, because it is an issue of pretty high importance when it comes to clean water and safety. As far as it being in foods, arsenic is in all of the foods that we eat. It is high levels of all of the fruits and vegetables, but it is also in rice. And rice grows in all parts of the world, and there's been studies over the last few years just to see how rice takes up arsenic, the levels that are in rice around the world. And it's been something that started out in a couple Asian countries, especially around the Bangladesh area, because there are areas of high arsenic content in the soil in Bangladesh, and also high content in the water, just because of the Himalayas and some of the naturally occurring runoff that comes out of those mountains. So the study started looking at a very specific health concern for these areas of Asia, but then it spread throughout the world as we're looking closer to the health and safety of all of our foods. So the studies that came out, there's a study from Dartmouth, and there's also been some Consumer Reports articles that have come out, have been measuring the levels of arsenic within rice here in the United States and products being brought into the United States. And you'll see that if you get on our website, I think people who are interested in finding out more about it, you'll get a lot of really good information, because we can tell you there's studies that show, first of all, how did the arsenic get in the rice. There's people looking at how rice as a plant pulls arsenic out of the soil. You can see how we look at the risks, and there's even ways that people can cook products differently to reduce the levels of arsenic. But right now, the big message that you'll also see, and there's a lot of information, you need to make your decisions for yourself, but the FDA, when they responded to the Consumer Reports article this last year, said that they recommend that people not change their eating habits, because we still recognize that materials like this are throughout our food system, but they're not at unhealthy levels, and their guidance is to not change our eating habits. Now, the FDA is in the process of testing 1,200 products. They're going to be releasing their study in anytime now. They'll also be putting out guidance levels in the fall, talking specifically about rice. And then they're going to be addressing all food crops. So you'll be seeing over the next probably 5 years that the FDA will be looking at arsenic in all foods here in the United States and talking to consumers about risk factors and anything that they should do to make food choices. But if people are interested, take a look at our website because we have a lot of good articles, and if you have other questions, feel free to contact us through our consumer response. Because we've been answering a lot of questions, people have a lot of questions, and it's just something that we're trying to learn as much about as possible because we think that people really should be able to ask these questions and be able to understand as much as possible about the food that they're eating.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you so much for answering that question. It's definitely a concerning topic. So Jessica, we're almost out of time here. Just one last question. Could you just let everyone know where they can find Lundberg products?
Sure. Well, we're distributed throughout the United States. So wherever you are in the U.S., if you have access to anything from a small mom-and-pop natural food store all the way up through a grocery or a club store, you can find our rice and our products. There's many different places you can find us. In grocery stores, you'll find us in the bulk foods area. You'll find us in the packaged rice area. Many times you can find us in a natural food set if your store has a natural food section, or even in the gluten-free section. But with 250 products and many ways to eat rice, there's a lot of places you can find us. And if you still have trouble, take a look on our website. We have a store locator that will give you the names of and addresses of some of your local stores so that you can find us a little quicker and easier.
Right, right. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, again, for your time and all this great information you've given us and for answering everyone's questions. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and we just hope that you'll enjoy sampling the rice chips with your group, and hope that you'll be connecting Lundberg on their website to learn more about the other products. So with that said, it's time to go. Jessica, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Just to thank you for letting us participate today in the webinar, and to encourage people that if you get the chance, please get involved in the labeling efforts on a national label with Just Label It or with the Washington Label Initiative. We need to speak up and have a voice, and I appreciate your interest in learning about genetically modified organisms in our farm. Thanks.